My name is Olivia. I'm 34 years old, a senior risk data analyst by trade, a woman who spends her days calculating variables, predicting outcomes, and protecting people from financial disaster. But 6 years of marriage taught me something my job never could. Sometimes the biggest risk isn't in the numbers. It's in the person sleeping beside you. Before I tell you exactly how my husband's affair, and the husband of his mistress, collided to bring down an entire family, let me set the scene. Because 2 days before a stranger walked onto my patio and offered me $700 million, my life fell apart in the space of a single morning. It was a Tuesday. Soft spring light was pouring through my kitchen window, and I was sitting at the island with a fresh cup of coffee, feeling calm. Prepared. For months, I'd been quietly funneling my bonuses into a joint savings account, watching the number climb until it hit my target, $150,000. Today was the day I planned to execute a stock buyout, a smart, careful move, the kind I made a career out of making. I opened my laptop. Typed in my credentials. Waited. And then I just stared. The balance read 0. Not low. Not pending. 0. I told myself it was a glitch. A banking error. Anything but what it actually was. I pulled up the transaction history with hands that were suddenly not quite steady, and there it was, a single outbound wire transfer for the full $150,000, executed the night before. Authorized by my husband, Ryan. I reached for my phone, already dialing the bank to report identity theft, and that's when the front door swung open. Ryan strolled in, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, humming to himself over a cup of artisan coffee, looking like a man without a single care in the world. I spun my laptop toward him. Ryan. Why is the account empty? He didn't flinch. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. He just smiled, a small, satisfied smile, and set his keys on the counter like he was arriving home from an ordinary day. Oh good, you saw it, he said. I meant to tell you before I left. I moved the funds. Moved them where? Into a safe investment, he said, in the tone you'd use on a child. The money's in an account under Lauren's name. Lauren. His 29-year-old former assistant. The one who laughed too loudly at his jokes. The one who lingered a beat too long whenever she handed him a drink. You transferred my life savings to your assistant, I said, and the floor seemed to shift under me. Ryan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter with infuriating calm. Let's be honest, Olivia. We've been running on fumes for over a year. I'm filing for divorce today. I've already spoken to my lawyer. I stood frozen in my own kitchen while my husband calmly announced, over his morning coffee, that he'd been having an affair, drained our savings to fund it, and was walking away without so much as a flicker of guilt. But he wasn't finished. Since we're ripping the Band-Aid off, he continued, stepping closer, his voice hardening, I need you to pack your things. You have 48 hours to vacate this house. I stared at him. I paid 70% of the down payment on this property, Ryan. You cannot just kick me out of my own home. He laughed, sharp, mocking. Oh, but I can. While you were buried in your spreadsheets, I was making real moves. Lauren and I need the space. He picked up his briefcase, paused at the door, and delivered his parting shot with a cruelty he'd clearly been saving. You calculate risk for a living, Olivia. But you couldn't calculate your own husband getting bored of you. Enjoy figuring out your new budget. The door shut behind him. And I stood there completely alone, in a house I was about to lose, with nothing left to my name. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood in the silence and started calculating my next move. Then the door opened again. Ryan had forgotten his gym bag. He came back for it, but he lingered, because his ego needed one more audience. You're wondering why I did it, he said, that same smug tone. Why I chose Lauren over a woman with a six-figure salary. I wasn't wondering anything, I said flatly. I was calculating how long you'll last in federal court. He scoffed. Always the cold, calculating machine. That's exactly why this marriage failed. You want the real reason I'm leaving? Lauren's pregnant. With my son. He wanted me to shatter right there on the floor. She knows how to be a real woman, he went on. She makes me feel like a husband. A man wants a family, Olivia, not a business partner married to a risk assessment matrix. I absorbed every word without flinching, my mind quietly cataloging the facts like evidence. Congratulations on your growing family, I said, my voice sterile. But I am not vacating this house. My name is on the deed. Ryan actually laughed at that. He pulled a folded document from his jacket and tossed it onto the table. You really think I'd drop a bomb like this without covering myself first? The house isn't a shared asset anymore. I refinanced it. You can't refinance a jointly owned property without my signature, I said slowly. The bank requires a notary. Exactly, he said, smiling like a man who'd just won. Which is why you signed the loan agreements last Thursday. My buddy David from the club notarized it himself. It's done. The bank approved the disbursement yesterday. Last Thursday, I was 3 states away at a risk management conference. I had the plane tickets. The hotel receipts. I hadn't signed anything. And in that moment, I understood exactly what my husband had done. He hadn't just stolen from me. He'd forged my signature on federal banking documents. Conspired with a notary to falsify a legal record. Committed wire fraud to strip the equity out of my own home. Every instinct told me to scream, to break something, to let him see exactly how deep the wound went. But I've spent my entire career learning one unbreakable rule: never let the enemy see you bleed. So I swallowed the panic, buried it in a cold, quiet place, and looked at him with nothing but stillness. I see, I said. Well. If the documents are signed, there's nothing left to discuss. He looked almost disappointed. He wanted the tears. The begging. My silence was ruining his big finale. Have your boxes packed by Thursday, he muttered, and walked out for good. I picked up the loan summary he'd left behind. $500,000 in equity, pulled from my home without my knowledge. I walked into my office, opened a new encrypted folder, and named it Federal Fraud Evidence. My husband thought he'd buried a boring woman with a spreadsheet. He had no idea what my job actually was. I don't just evaluate risk. I dismantle it. And Ryan had just become the single biggest liability of his own life. I hadn't even finished my first file when the front door opened again. This time it wasn't Ryan. It was his mother, Patricia, sweeping into my living room flanked by my father-in-law, Richard, and my sister-in-law, Natalie, arms full of flattened moving boxes, not a single knock between them. Ryan had handed them a key and sent them to finish the job. We're helping you pack, Olivia, Patricia announced, as if she were performing an act of charity. Ryan told us you're vacating. We want this to be swift and clean, especially for Lauren. The poor girl is under enough stress. I watched Richard pull framed photographs off my shelves and drop them into a box like garbage. A man needs to secure his legacy, he said, without even looking at me. Natalie chimed in from the sofa. Honestly, Olivia, you should have seen this coming. You were never home. Lauren actually adores him, she's already picking out nursery colors. They wanted a breakdown. They wanted tears, a scene, a headline for their group chat about the hysterical, bitter ex-wife who couldn't handle the truth. I gave them nothing. You're openly helping your son commit fraud, I said, my voice flat and factual. You're helping him enforce a forged mortgage. Patricia only smiled, cold and entitled. Lauren is giving us an heir, Olivia. Consider that 150,000 your severance package, for wasting my son's youth. I looked at the three of them and, for the first time, saw them clearly. Not family. Accomplices. Every word out of their mouths was one more piece of evidence, one more thread tying them to the fraud. Patricia had just confirmed she knew about the stolen money, accessory after the fact. Richard was hauling out my belongings while praising his son's financial genius, complicit in the seizure of a fraudulently mortgaged home. Natalie, gleefully prepping a nursery in a house built on stolen equity. They thought I was paralyzed by heartbreak. In reality, I was simply gathering data. Pack whatever you like, I said quietly, and walked toward the kitchen, leaving them to their celebration. That's where Jamal found me. Jamal was Natalie's husband, a sharp, quiet, brilliant independent auditor who had always seemed slightly out of place amid his in-laws' loud, toxic arrogance. He came into the kitchen under the pretense of getting water, turned on the faucet to mask his voice, and stood beside me at the island. "Keep looking straight ahead," he murmured. "Don't react. Just listen." My pulse spiked, but my face stayed perfectly still. With a swift, practiced motion, he slid a folded piece of paper into my pocket. "They didn't just take your savings," he whispered. "Ryan forged your signature to pull a $500,000 line of credit. Call this number. Harrison is looking for you." The name landed like a blow. Harrison, Lauren's husband. The husband of the mistress. "I saw the paperwork an hour ago," Jamal continued, barely audible. "Ryan was bragging to Richard in the study. He thinks he's untouchable because Richard co-signed it. But Harrison already found the trail on Lauren's end. Call him the moment you're out of this house. He has a plan." He shut off the faucet, met my eyes one final time, and said simply, "Take them down, Olivia." Then he walked back into the living room, back into the circus, as if nothing had happened. I stood there with the folded slip burning in my pocket. It wasn't just a phone number. It was a loaded weapon, and my mind, built for exactly this kind of war, shifted instantly from survival to offense. Ryan wanted me gone. So I decided to give him exactly what he wanted, a quiet, defeated exit that would let me disappear and start building in silence. I walked back into the living room, let my shoulders slump, let my voice go hollow. "You can have the house," I said. "I'm leaving." Patricia beamed, victorious. "I knew you'd see reason." I didn't answer. I grabbed my coat, left my keys on the console table, and walked out the front door into the cold spring air, carrying nothing but my purse and a folded slip of paper that was about to change everything. In my car, I dialed the number. 2 rings, and a deep, controlled voice answered. "This is Harrison." "This is Olivia," I said, dropping the defeated wife act entirely, letting the sharp precision of my real self take over. "I believe we have a mutual problem to dismantle." "I know exactly who you are," Harrison replied. "There's a car waiting at the corner of your street. Get in. We're meeting at the Obsidian in 20 minutes. The line went dead. A sleek black town car was already idling at the corner, just as promised. It carried me into the financial district, toward a private club with no sign, no windows, and a strict ban on photographs, the kind of place that exists entirely outside the world I'd just walked out of. I was led to a private back room, where Harrison was waiting. 40 years old, dressed in a suit that cost a fortune without announcing it, a crystal decanter of scotch on the table between us. He didn't look like a man whose wife had just left him for someone else. He looked calm. Lethal. "Sit down, Olivia," he said, sliding a glass toward me. "We have a lot of data to review." "Jamal gave me your number," I said, ignoring the drink. "He told me Ryan forged my signature for a $500,000 line of credit." Harrison let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's pocket change. That's their domestic nesting fund. The real crime is bigger. He tossed a thick folder across the table. I opened it, and in under 30 seconds, my training told me exactly what I was looking at: offshore routing numbers, encrypted transfers, fabricated vendor invoices. Lauren and Ryan had embezzled $2 million from Harrison's company, using her old security clearance to fake the paperwork, laundering it through 3 international accounts before letting it settle in a domestic shell company. How could they think they'd get away with stealing $2 million without anyone noticing? I asked. Harrison took a slow sip of scotch. Because my wife has no idea who I actually am, he said. To Lauren, I'm a mid-level operations director at a regional logistics firm. She thinks I make maybe $180,000 a year. She complains about my modest pension. She thinks she married a safe, boring, unambitious man. He smiled, and it was chilling. She doesn't know I'm a venture capitalist. That the firm she thinks I work for is one of 47 companies in my portfolio. My net worth is invisible by design, locked behind blind trusts built long before I ever met her. The pieces clicked together with mechanical precision. So when they stole the $2 million, I said, they thought they were draining a faceless, disorganized company. Exactly, Harrison said. They didn't realize that Shell Company is owned entirely by my trust. They didn't steal from a corporation. They stole directly from me, and I watched them do it. You let them commit federal fraud, I said, feeling something like professional respect settle over me. Divorce court is slow and messy, he said coldly. I don't fight emotional battles. I amputate liabilities. I needed them to commit a crime so massive that prison and total ruin would be their only remaining options. I gave them enough rope. They tied their own nooses. And now you need something to close the trap completely, I said. You need me. He nodded, sliding a single dense page across the table. White-collar criminals like Ryan and Lauren believe that if they're caught, they can hire a good lawyer, cut a plea deal, and file for bankruptcy to erase it all. I intend to take that option away from them entirely. To do that, we have to merge 2 separate crimes into one undeniable federal conspiracy: your stolen $150,000, and my stolen $2 million. And how exactly do you merge crimes committed by 2 different people against 2 different victims? I asked. We merge the victims, Harrison said evenly. I'm proposing a marriage, Olivia. A real, legally binding contract between you and me. The audacity of it hung in the quiet room. But my mind was already racing ahead, mapping the legal architecture. If we were married, our separate losses would become a single, coordinated attack on one legal entity, transforming Ryan and Lauren from petty thieves into co-conspirators in a multi-million-dollar racketeering case. And because Richard had co-signed Ryan's fraudulent line of credit, his own estate would be pulled directly into the blast radius the moment federal agents froze the accounts. The terms, Harrison said, sliding a platinum pen toward me, are simple. Strictly business. A postnuptial agreement protects both our assets. We stay married just long enough for the indictments to drop and the forfeitures to finalize. Then we file for an amicable annulment. In exchange for your cooperation, I'll pay you a consulting fee of $1.5 million the moment it's done. 10 times what they took from you. I looked at the document. Financial freedom. Independence. And the total, permanent destruction of the people who had tried to erase me. I didn't need time to think. The math was perfectly clear. I picked up the pen. I'm a risk analyst, Harrison, I said, meeting his eyes. And I calculate that Ryan and Lauren are about to experience a catastrophic market crash. I signed my name. He extended his hand, and we sealed the deal with a handshake forged entirely out of betrayal and cold logic. Tomorrow, noon, Harrison said. Wear something sharp. We have a courthouse to visit, and a trap to set. That night, in a secure suite Harrison arranged for me, I began building the case in earnest. Ryan had left a digital trail as subtle as a lit sign in a dark room, the wire transfer traced straight back to his own office IP address, no attempt to hide it. The forged mortgage documents, when I pulled the metadata, revealed they'd been scanned on a machine registered to Lauren's apartment building, with a digital timestamp that didn't match the notary's physical stamp. His country club friend had cut corners backdating the seal, leaving a glaring, prosecutable gap. I merged my findings with Harrison's folder. Ryan had linked his personal phone number to the two-factor authentication on the shell company's banking portal, a catastrophic mistake born purely of arrogance. I mapped the entire network on my screen, green lines for the domestic forgery, red lines for the international wire fraud, all of it converging into one flawless, inescapable case. The next evening, Jamal arrived at the suite with a stack of audit logs he'd pulled under the pretense of a routine compliance check. Ryan didn't just forge your signature to leverage the house, he said, tapping a highlighted line. He needed a guarantor with liquid assets to force the loan through. He pointed to a signature at the bottom of the page. Your father-in-law co-signed the entire $500,000. He used his own house as collateral. The trap had just grown teeth. If the federal case triggered a default, the bank wouldn't wait for a court order, it would seize Richard's collateral automatically, on the very same day Ryan was arrested. Will taking down Ryan destroy them completely? Jamal asked quietly. Yes, I said, without hesitation. Nobody in that room suggested mercy. Patricia had called my stolen life savings a severance package. Richard had laughed while helping steal my home. I was simply returning the favor, dollar for dollar, lie for lie. We show no mercy, I said. 2 days later, I walked into a glass-paneled conference room dressed as the woman Ryan expected, soft, disheveled, defeated. Ryan sat across from me, flanked by his slick attorney, wearing a new watch bought with my stolen money, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he'd already won. His lawyer slid a thick settlement across the table, a quitclaim deed relinquishing every right to the house, and an acknowledgement of the new, fraudulent mortgage. What neither of them knew was that Harrison's legal team had intercepted the draft the night before and buried a single devastating clause deep inside the indemnification section, one that bound every asset Ryan would ever acquire to the debt he was about to inherit, and stripped him of any right to hide behind bankruptcy or corporate protection. I signed with a trembling hand, playing my part perfectly. Ryan, too arrogant to read a single line of his own victory, scrawled his signature across every page without hesitation, sealing his own fate with a self-satisfied grin. As I turned to leave, he couldn't resist one final cut. Have a nice life in a studio apartment, he sneered. Spreadsheets can't keep you warm at night. I stopped at the door. Let the fragile, broken act fall away completely. Straightened my spine. And looked at him with the cold certainty of a woman who already knew exactly how this would end. I'll get exactly what I deserve, I said, and walked out. Within 48 hours, Ryan and Lauren took the newly extracted $500,000, combined it with the $2 million stolen from Harrison, and poured it into the down payment on a $3 million estate in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, unknowingly welding the domestic forgery and the international fraud into one seamless, undeniable paper trail. Meanwhile, Patricia and Natalie turned my public humiliation into a full-blown campaign, flooding social media with photos of the new mansion, tagging me in every post, narrating their triumph for the world to see. Every photo, every gloating caption, became another exhibit in the file I was building. They were documenting their own crimes in real time. A week later, in Harrison's glass and steel penthouse high above the city, our legal team finalized the case for the FBI and the IRS, every wire, every forged signature, every routed transfer, indexed and ready. Watching Patricia livestream a tour of a nursery paid for with stolen money, Harrison offered only a quiet, predatory smile. Let them climb higher, he said. The fall will break more bones. The next morning, we struck. No sirens, no dramatic confrontation, just an encrypted flash drive handed to a contact in the FBI's white-collar division, and a mirrored file routed to the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit. Federal cases don't begin with noise. They begin in silence, with sealed subpoenas landing quietly on the desks of banking compliance officers while the target remains completely unaware. And Ryan remained exactly that, oblivious, picking out imported marble for his new foyer while his accounts were quietly flagged, frozen, and locked from the inside. Then, a thick cream envelope arrived at my temporary suite. Inside, a gold-embossed invitation to Ryan and Lauren's engagement and gender reveal party at the most exclusive country club in the city, and a handwritten note from Patricia. Thought you'd like to see what a real family looks like. I didn't feel the sting she was hoping for. Instead, I felt something colder and far more useful, clarity. I cross-referenced the party date against our federal timeline, and the alignment was almost too perfect to believe. The party fell on the exact weekend the FBI was set to execute the seizure warrants. Ryan and Lauren were about to host the most extravagant night of their lives, surrounded by the city's elite, at the precise moment their entire fortune ceased to exist. I picked up my pen and RSVP'd. Not for one, for two. I checked the most expensive entree on the card. Let Richard's fraudulent credit line pay for it. On the night of the party, I didn't dress like a broken woman. I stood in front of the mirror in a floor-length emerald gown, diamonds at my wrist, hair falling loose for the first time in years, and I didn't recognize the fragile, grieving version of myself that used to live in that reflection. She was gone. In her place stood someone who had built, calmly and methodically, the machinery of her own justice. Harrison arrived in a midnight blue tuxedo, looking every inch the man he actually was, not the boring middle manager Lauren had discarded, but the architect of the trap about to close around her. They're expecting a broken woman, he said. We're going to hand them an apex predator. We arrived at the Oak Creek Country Club to find it dripping in stolen extravagance, white orchids, a towering ice sculpture, a live string quartet, champagne flowing for 300 guests who had no idea they were about to witness a public execution. The moment we stepped through the doors, the room noticed. Conversation died in ripples. The quartet faltered into silence. Every head turned. Lauren saw Harrison first, and her face drained of color, because the man she'd mocked as boring and unambitious was standing in front of her radiating a wealth and authority she'd never imagined he possessed. Ryan's smug expression cracked into confusion, his mind racing to connect dots his ego had never let him see. Patricia stormed toward us first, fury barely restrained. What do you think you're doing here? You are not welcome in this family. I RSVP'd to the invitation you sent me, Patricia, I said, letting my voice carry clearly across the silent ballroom. You wanted me to see what a real family looks like. I'm simply honoring that request. She called for security. Ryan stepped forward, trying to reclaim his authority. I didn't move an inch. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a black envelope, holding it up so the light caught its edge. I wouldn't do that, I said. We actually brought you a gift. I walked past all of them, climbed the small stage where the quartet had gone silent, and took the microphone. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice steady and clear. For those who don't know me, my name is Olivia. Until recently, I was married to Ryan. I let that settle before continuing. Many of you have seen the photos of the magnificent new estate he and his bride-to-be just acquired. I just wanted to take a moment to personally congratulate you both, as your landlord. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ryan's face went white. You're insane, he snapped. I bought that house. You bought it through a shell company registered in Delaware, I said. A company that is a wholly owned subsidiary of Harrison's Trust. You didn't buy a house, Ryan. You wired $2.5 million directly back into the very accounts you stole it from. Lauren collapsed against a table. Patricia's hands flew to her mouth. I handed the microphone to Harrison, who stepped forward and, in a voice utterly without mercy, told Lauren exactly who he really was, a man worth over $700 million, hiding behind a modest job because he'd wanted a wife who valued him instead of his bank account. Then he turned to Ryan and laid out the final mechanism of the trap, how the $2 million in embezzled corporate funds had been structured as a formal loan, how the quitclaim deed Ryan signed without reading had bound his entire future to that debt, how the penalties and compounding interest had already pushed his liability past $20 million, non-dischargeable, unshakable, his for the rest of his life. Richard lunged forward, red-faced, threatening lawsuits and lawyers he could no longer afford. I stepped in front of Harrison and asked him, quietly, calmly, the only question that mattered. With what money, Richard? I held up my phone, showing him the zero balance now sitting where his fortune used to be, his estate seized as collateral the moment Ryan's loan defaulted. He didn't have money for a lawyer. He barely had money for the valet. Patricia collapsed to the marble floor, sobbing. The very guests she'd spent decades trying to impress turned their backs and walked out without a word of comfort. Natalie wept near the melting ice sculpture. And then Jamal stepped forward from the crowd, tossed his audit file onto a cocktail table with a resounding crack, and looked his brother-in-law dead in the eye. "I warned you," he said. "Never cross an auditor." That's when the sirens started. Red and blue light swept across the windows as federal agents flooded into the ballroom, moving with brisk, practiced precision. "Ryan Blackwood." "Lauren Blackwood," the lead agent announced, "you're under arrest." Handcuffs closed with a sharp metallic click. Ryan sobbed. Lauren screamed that she was a victim. The loyalty between them evaporated instantly, each one turning on the other the moment the trap sprang shut. As agents dragged him toward the door, Ryan twisted back toward me, tears streaking his face. "Olivia, please. Tell them it's a mistake. I'll give the house back. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I walked up to him, calm, unshaken, and looked him directly in the eye. "I calculated the risk, Ryan," I said. "The math says you're going to prison." The doors closed behind them, swallowing his sobs and Lauren's screams into the night. Behind us, the country club's elite finished the job we started, turning their backs on Patricia and Richard, abandoning them exactly as they had once abandoned decency. 6 months later, the dust had settled completely. Ryan is serving 8 years in federal prison. Lauren avoided time by testifying against him and now works a minimum wage job, her ambitions permanently buried under a felony record. Patricia and Richard lost everything, their estate liquidated, their bankruptcy filing useless against a debt tied to federal fraud. They now live quietly in a small rented apartment, strangers to the life they once flaunted. Harrison and I dissolved our marriage exactly as cleanly as we'd built it, a handshake, a signature, and a $5 million consulting fee that became the foundation of my own firm. I didn't buy a mansion. I built an empire, a risk management consultancy specializing in exactly the kind of corporate fraud and hostile takeovers I'd just lived through. My first hire was Jamal, who walked away from his marriage to Natalie and became my chief financial officer. I am no longer the woman who sat quietly analyzing spreadsheets while her life was stolen out from under her. I am independent. I am powerful. And I hold complete ownership over my own future. The most expensive lesson a trader can ever learn is this: never show your cards until the game is already over. And never, ever underestimate the quiet ones.